Hello and welcome to the Burrow. This is the second video in our series on the Burrows and Badgers skirmish game. In the first video we looked at creating a warband. In this video we're going to have a look at what are the things you need to play the game and take a look at a few of the basic concepts of the rules. So what do you need to play a game? Well, when we looked at creating a warband we saw that you'd need a rulebook, you'd need some miniatures to make up your warband, and you need a warband roster to record their statistics and equipment on, and a pencil to do that recording. You'll also need, though, a playing surface of some kind, such as a gaming mat, an MDF board, or one of the printed mats that you can get these days. Size-wise, the most commonly used size is a 36 by 36 inches, 3 foot by 3 foot. A lot of people use a 4 foot by 4 foot board as well. That can give a good game too. You'll have a fair bit more space if you do that. We've also quite often used a 24 inches by 48 inches gaming board. We've found that you can then play the same scenario lengthways as well as widthways and get quite a different result. And in recent times as well, Games Workshop have started popularising a new size of 30 inches by 44 inches. So obviously because they're Games Workshop, a lot of people have jumped on that, and there's an awful lot of printed mats available in that size. We've tried them out for Burrows and Badgers and we've found they can give a good game too. So as well as your playing surface, you're also going to need some terrain, something to kind of get in the way, something for your warbands to move around and block line of sight. We generally find that terrain, we'd recommend one piece per square foot of the tabletop at least. Typically, the more terrain you get on the table, the better the game's going to be. As well as that, you'll also need a tape measure marked in inches for measuring movement, shooting ranges, things like that. Each player will also need a set of polyhedral dice, the kind you'll be familiar with from role-playing games probably. Funny-sided dice basically, D4s, D6s, D8s, and so on. Both players will need a set of those each. It can also be useful to have a few spares of those around as well for things like fate points, but we'll cover that later. So then, once you've got all your stuff sorted, let's have a look at some of the basic concepts of the rules. We'll start with the word may. Now, it seems a straightforward word to me, but apparently, depending on where you are in the world, this word gets used quite differently, even amongst English speakers. So, when we use the word may in Burrows and Badgers, what do we mean? Well, when you come across it in the rules, it means you can do a thing, but you don't have to do that thing. For example, the shoot action says, a model making a shoot action may make one move. So you could choose to make a move before shooting, or you could choose to stand still and gain the bonus for standing still. Basically, it's up to the player to decide. Measuring. Okay, well we said all measurements are made in inches in the game. It's important to note that when you're measuring, you always measure from the edge of a model's base. For example, if you're shooting with a bow, which has a range of 24 inches, you would measure from the edge of your model's base, and if any part of your target's base was within that 24 inches range, then they're within range of the bow. It's worth noting too that you can measure at any time in the game. You don't have to wait for your turn or for when you're making an action. Any player can make any measurements at any time to check distances, ranges, movement, things like that. Of course, if you are planning to take a shoot action at one of your opponent's models, you'll need to check for line of sight. So, what do we mean by line of sight? Well, basically, models have to be able to see each other. The easiest and most common way to check if a model has line of sight up to another model is just simply get down behind that model on the tabletop and get it to your eye level and have a look and see if you can see the other model. You can also use a laser pointer, or some people even use a long piece of doweling. If you can clearly see all of the target model, including its base, then you have clear line of sight. If you can see part of the model, or part of its base, but not the whole model, then you have partial line of sight. If you can't see it at all, you don't have line of sight. Simple as that. It's worth noting though that all models have a 360-degree line of sight, so they're assumed to be able to see in any direction, regardless of which direction the miniature itself is actually facing. They can see all the way around. Alright. Base contact, that's another thing that comes up a lot in the rules. Models are considered to be in base contact when both bases are touching each other. If one of the models is standing on a slightly raised surface, say up to an inch, they'd still be considered in base contact provided their bases were touching if they were on a level surface. So nothing massive, but up to an inch, you'd still consider them in base contact. A model is considered in base contact with a piece of terrain if any part of its base, including the base edge, is touching the terrain piece. Okay, onto the core rule mechanic of the game. This is really the heart of all actions that you'll take in the game. It's called a roll-off. The rules of the game are entirely based around this, really. Whenever a player carries out an action with one of their models, they will often have to carry out a roll-off to determine the success or failure of that action. A roll-off will involve one of the model's statistics. Which one depends on the action being performed. The acting player rolls the type of dice assigned to the appropriate stat, adds or subtracts any modifiers that apply, and that total that they get is known as the player's roll. Now then, that roll is compared either to a target number for some actions, or more commonly to the other player's roll. If the acting player's roll is higher than the opposing roll or the target number, then the action succeeds. If it's equal or lower, then the action fails. Now, assuming your action has succeeded, assuming you've rolled higher than the opposing roll or target number, then you determine how well it succeeds by subtracting the opposing roll or target number from your roll. And that number, the difference between the two, is called the result. And the higher it is, the more successful the action's been. Perfect rolls. When you're rolling dice for a roll-off, sometimes you'll get what we refer to as a perfect roll. Now, this happens when you roll the highest possible number on your dice, like a 6 if you're rolling a d6, or a 12 if you're rolling a d12. When you get a perfect roll, when you roll that highest possible number, then you get a +7 modifier to your roll. Note though that the perfect roll rule only applies to dice rolled during roll-offs, not dice rolled for any other reason, such as rolling for a spell's damage or rolling for movement in difficult terrains. You don't get the bonus then, it's only in roll-offs. Right. Finally, it's important to remember that as well as positive modifiers, such as the +7 for getting a perfect roll, a player's roll can often be affected by negative modifiers, maybe due to wounds or cursed spells, that kind of thing. But no matter how many negative modifiers are applied, no roll can ever be taken below 0. It always stops at 0. So even if you roll a 1 and had -3 penalty to that roll, the lowest your total roll could ever be is 0. Well, that covers the basics. In the next video, we'll start looking more in depth at the rules, starting with movement. Thank you for watching.